Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we start this Bava Batra daf Lamed Aleph. We are going to begin on the very top of Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, the first line. Ze omer shalavoisai v'ze omer shalavosai. So you have two different people regarding, as the Rashbam says, hayakarka, regarding land, varihi shali, and each one claims that it belongs to them. However, they are saying that the reason why it belongs to them is because they inherited it from their fathers. So, Hayesi Sahadi Davasehi, one actually was able to produce witnesses that in fact the land belonged to his father. Vahai Aisi Sahadi Da'achashne Chazaka. The other one instead was able to produce witnesses that he was there for the years of Chazaka. So the question is, who do we listen to? You have on one hand a person who has witnesses that the land belonged to his father, and yet you have another person who was there for Shtei Chazaka. So on this, Omer Rabba Malu Shaker. Why would this person lie? Says Rashbam, Lazeh HaMachzik, the person who is the Machzik, B'mai Detoyin D'Shalavoisa V'Yarshmehem. Why did he have to say that he inherited it? He could have said he purchased the land directly from this guy. Since this person has years of chazaka, even though this other person does have a witness that it belonged to his father, that doesn't make any difference, because he could always have claimed, because he has a chazaka, that he actually bought it directly from this person and that he didn't make a macha. So that since there's a malu shaker, so therefore that person who has the shnei chazaka will win. So that is the opinion of Rabbi. Normally, Abaye says no, and the Rashbam says Talmido Abaye. The student Abaye said, "Ma'ilil shaker." Why would he lie? B'makam edim lamrinan. Over here, you have edim that contradicts. Says the Rashbam, Shar edim machishin es devarav. You have witnesses that are contradicting his words. Those witnesses are saying that the land belongs to this other guy, because they know for sure that it belonged to their father, to his father. So therefore, because of that, even though this other guy is a Malu Shaker, but it's B'makam Edim, he's going against Edim, and therefore it won't work. In he. So then the story continues, and the man said, "You know what? You're right. It did belong to your father. However, uzavanta minoch v'haydi amrulach de'avasi." The reason why I said it belonged to my father, the samachli Allah kidavasi, because it's basically in my mind like my father. So says the Rashbam, Hadar Amalei in Timishum Shahayim Asidin Aiso Kabaye, since he saw that he was going to lose like the sheet of Abaye, because Abaye said Ma'ala Shakar Makam Edim, you have Edim that belongs to the father. So he goes, oh, okay, you're right. In fact, it did belong to your father, like those witnesses said. However, I'm going to be chayzer v'litain. I'm going to go and make a new or separate taina to try to get the land for myself. So again, the fact that he said what he did was saying, no, I did buy it from you, and the only reason why I said what I said is because it's ki'u, like it was from my father. So the question is, is a person allowed to make a claim in Beis Din, and then once apparently it looks like you're going to lose, you can come up with a new taina in order to be able to somehow get out of the way of losing the case. So on this, so we actually have a machlokas whether or not a person is able to do that. So umaydi ula. Now even the ula says that a person could come up with a second claim, he will agree in the following case you can't. If you would have literally said a contradictory statement, his first statement was, it does not belong to your father, then you can no longer say, oh yeah, actually, it was your father's, but I bought it from you. No, you can't do that, because anytime you're tayin b'chaz v'tayin, even if you hold you could be tayin b'chaz v'tayin, that doesn't give you the right to make a second claim, which is an absolute direct contradiction. So on this, the Rashbam explains that all you're doing is l'taretz devarim harishayim. According to Ula, if all you're doing in your second statement is just elaborating on what your first statement is. Says the Rashba. So according to Ula, in the event where there's an absolute contradictory statement, one statement to the next, then you're not going to be Taina Chaz v'Tayin. However, in a situation where it's only a partial, seemingly a contradictory statement, but since you're able to elaborate on what you're meant, so then according to this Shut of Ula, that you could do it. Let's say a person was in Beis Din, and he did not make any taina at all, didn't say anything. Then all of a sudden he steps outside a court after he had the opportunity to speak. And then all of a sudden he comes back. So in that situation, even Ul will admit that you cannot be chayzer tayin in that situation. My taima, probably because Tansei Agmare, he probably learned the right way of making a claim once he stepped out of court. And therefore, that's not going to certainly work. So, again, in the event that he doesn't make a first claim at all, and almost then he comes out of court and comes back, and obviously someone taught him the right thing to say. Okay. Umayda Nahardoi. Now, Nahardoi will agree, in a situation, now even though Nahardoi typically says that you cannot be Tayin Chayz v'Tayin, however, here you can. If you say it belonged to my father, that he purchased it from your father, the Chayz v'Tayin, that in that situation he holds you are allowed to be Tayin Chayz v'Tayin. Why? So isn't that like a contradiction? So how is this any different? So the Rashbam says, because Elo Moisif Aleihin, all you're doing is adding on to the original statement. The Kivan, the Hichsik Bashal Shanim, since you're there for 3 years, Makmin la biyadeh, the Chazaka Shesh Ima Tainahi. This is considered to be a Chazaka with a Taina. Because again, we're talking about a person who does have a Chazaka of 3 years, and the whole question is, what was his first statement? So the second statement is not even a slight contradiction. All he's doing is being Moisif Aleihen. All he's doing is he is adding onto his original statement. And therefore, if that's all he's doing, then even Nahardoi will agree that you could be Tayin B'chaz v'Tayin in that situation. So again, Moida Nahardoi Heichad Yarmalei Shel Avoisai, it was my father's Shilakhu Me'avoisecha, I bought it from your father, the Chayz v'Tayin. Let's say there were matters that took place on the outside and he didn't make a taina. All of a sudden he goes into Beis Din. He had the ability to speak outside of Beis Din. He says nothing. Goes into Beis Din, v'Tayin, the Chayz v'Tayin. So in that situation he could. My taima, because of it inish lo megali tanase elo beidina. Even though the fact that he was presented on the outside to speak and he decided not to, so that in itself doesn't mean anything. It's only when he's in Beis Din, he had a chance to speak, walks out, then we say that a person cannot be Tayin B'chaz v'Tayin. However, if he was originally in a situation where he was outside of Beis Din and he decides to say nothing, that doesn't mean anything, because a person may decide to wait until he's actually physically in Beis Din to make his taina, and therefore the fact that he was quiet on the outside doesn't matter. Delo megali tanase elo beidina. Amar Meimar says ana nahardana. It was severely the tayin b'chayz v'tayin. The hilchasa tayin b'chayz v'tayin. So the din is in fact that a person can be tayin b'chayz v'tayin. So therefore, this in fact is in accordance to the Shita of Ula. Okay, let's look at question 7. Ze oimer shalavoisai. Ze omer shalavosai. So each one says the same claim that the land belonged to my father. One bring proof that it belonged to his father with witnesses. And he ate v'achol shnei chazaka. V'hai aisi sahadi d'achol shnei chazaka. Mehem study hamachlokas b'zeh. So let's look at question 7. Okay, so let's hold off on that because I think we're not up to that yet. Okay, that's gonna be the next Gemara. So up until this point, again, that's gonna be the next Gemara we're gonna see in a second. So right now, again, we have a situation where both people said the same taina of Shil Avoisai, and then only one has Edom of Shil Avoisai, and the other one has Shnei Chazaka. So that was the first case. Now the Gemara says as follows: Zeh oimer Shil Avoisai v'zeh oimer Shil Avoisai. Same case, however, Hayai sahadi devas v'alcha Shnei Chazaka. So one of them actually has two things. He has two things going for him. First of all, he has witnesses that belong to his father, and he had years of Chazaka. So interestingly, you have two parties that both of them apparently have witnesses that it was Shnei Chazaka. So the question is, the fact that one of them also has witnesses that it belonged to the father, does that do anything? Does that give him a better claim to the land? So again, so Amr Rav Nachman, Uki Achila Hadi Achila. So we put the Achila of Shnei Chazaka together. They basically cancel each other out. So what does that mean? So says the Rashbam, Eidus de Achila Batela. It's considered like nothing. The Uki Eidus Shel Achila Keneged Eidus Shnia Shel Achila Bahari Machishan Zedzeh. So they completely cancel each other out. So the fact that they both have this taina of Shnei Chazaka doesn't mean anything. However, says the Rashbam, Abba Be'edus the Havasa, when it comes to the testimony that it belongs to the father, there's no contradiction. So we say edus and kayemes umuk mibiyadeh. So according to the Shita of Rav Nachman, even though the other guy has Shnei Chazaka, but since the first person also has Shnei Chazaka, those cancel out, and therefore all we're left with is the edus of the avasa, and therefore it goes to that person. So that's the Shita of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman uki achila lahadi achila. So Amalei Rabba. So Rabba says, I don't understand. Ha'edus mucheshesi. You've already established this is considered to be edus mucheshes. You have witnesses that are contradicting one another. Says the Rashbam, Kivan dahani beis kitois machish zuetzu. Since they cancel each other out, achas mem psul. Must be one of them is pasul. V'chol edus sheba'oilo. Yachar shein levayir eza psula tibata edus legamri. We have no idea which of these witnesses is lying and which ones are considered to be edus sheker. And therefore, because of that, it's not possible for us to be able to discertain and to understand what the din should be in this case, just because one has also edus of avasa, but maybe that person's testimony, those edim, their testimony, maybe they're edus sheker and they're apostle edus. So how do you understand this? So Amalei says, Nehi, granted, dischachesh b'achilasa. I understand that there's a contradiction between the two regarding the achila shnei chazaka as we continue to lamed alpha beis. However, b'havasa mi ischachesh. There's no contradiction when it comes to the testimony that it belonged to the man's father, and therefore, since there's no contradiction regarding that, so therefore we're going to give it to him. Says the Rashbam. Everyone agrees to this. And since everyone agrees to this, so therefore, it should go to this individual. So that is the machlokas. So Lema Rav Nachman. Let's say that this machlokas Rav Nachman is pluted Rav Huna Rav Chisda K'mifnagi. Maybe their machlokas is based on the machlokas Rav Huna Rav Chisda. Ditmar we learn like this. Beis kite edim. Hamachisha zu et zu. So you have two groups of witnesses, and they contradict each other. So Omer Rav Huna. So Rav Huna says, Zuba bifni atzma u'meida. This pair of witnesses can come by themselves and testify in a later case. V'zuba bifni atzma u'meida. In other words, we don't know which one is telling the truth and one's not. So the question is, if they would testify on a totally different case later on, but they're not testifying against each other, are those witnesses believed? Now, on one hand, you would think maybe not, because one of them is lying. But in this situation, because we're not sure, we're not going to automatically assume that this group of witnesses that's coming later on are the false witnesses. And therefore, we will listen to their testimony and accept it. That's Rav Huna's din. Rav Chisda Omer, Bahadi Stadi Shaker Lumli. Why do you want Eida Sheker? Just cancel them all out. In other words, if either of these two Kita Eidim come later on and testify about some other court case, we're not going to listen to them because we know one of these two pairs are Eida Sheker. So then, even though we're not sure, but why would we take that chance? And therefore, we're just not going to accept any of them. So, Lema Rav Nachman Diamer Rav Huna. Maybe Rav Nachman, who we just established, Rav Nachman in our case, he said that you would basically cancel achila to achila, but still ara becheskas avos, so we keep. So that sounds a lot like the shita of Rav Huna. Rav Huna says another testimony is accepted, even though there's contradictory testimony, but another testimony will be accepted. So too over here, even though the Shnei Chazak is contradictory, however, the testimony regarding the father is something which stands on its own. So therefore, so we see that they really hold the same thing. So again, Leim Rav Nachman Rav Huna, Varava Rav Chisda, Rava, who says that no, we're not going to assume that just because there is testimony specifically about about the father, that we're going to listen to that, because you have contradictory witnesses. So it's the same thing over here. If you have two contradictory witnesses, we're not going to allow them to give testimony afterwards either. So here we see, again, Rav Nachman is Rav Huna, and the Rav is Rav Chisda. Now, the Gemara says like this. Ali b'de Rav Chisda. So let's look at the Gemara, look at Rashbam first. V'zuba b'fnei atzma be'edus acheres. Totally different testimony. Avo. Echad mikadzu ve'echad mikadzu ein mistar from le'edus achas. The Rashbam points out something quite important. That if you have these two witnesses and another two witnesses, one of these pairs are lying, so you cannot take one and one from both of those pairs, and both of those two people will testify. Because again, they're definitely one of those groups are lying. Says the Rashbam. However, over here, again, we're not going to pasel b'safek, that's what he said. So Gemara is like this. Lema Rav Nachman Rav Huna Rav Chisda Liba Rav Chisda, based on Rav Chisda's statement that we don't listen to any testimony, even though it's testimony about something totally different. Kulmulo pligi. There's no question that there has to be this machlokus. In other words, according to Rav Chisda, he will have to be pegged like the shita of Rav Chisda will have to be like Rava. There's no other way around it. But keep playing a little bit of Rav Huna, because it's possible that they could split him. Rav Nachman, Rav Huna. Rav Nachman easily could fit like Rav Huna, as we established, that Rav Huna said that you can testify in separate things. So too in our case regarding the father, that testimony is accepted. But Rav Adkan Lakam Rav Huna, maybe the only time Rav Huna says they can testify is El Be'edas Acheres, is because it's a totally separate case. Totally something has nothing to do with this case. But over here, because the testimony was not just Shnei Chazaka, but it was also on the father, so maybe that much we don't do. Hadar I see. Fine. So let's look at question 7. Ze oimer shel voisai v'zemer shel voisai. Hay I see sahadi devasei v'yachal Shnei Chazaka v'hay I see sahadi d'achal Shnei Chazaka. So mehem study machlokas b'zeh. So what is the sad machlokas? So this is on the previous daf. Rav Nachman says uki ar becheskas bal edi havasa. Again, we have the witnesses that belong to this father, because the edi chazaka are canceled, and contradictory. But there's no contradictory testimony on the edi havasa. However, Rava holds that the koli dusin betela, everything gets thrown out. Okay, right. Let's say now this other guy comes and he actually testified. There's new testimony that it belonged to his father. So originally he only had Shnei Chazaka, but now he has also edus that the land belonged to his father. So both of them are really the same. So Omer Rav Nachman anan achtine anan maskinan le lazus bedin le chashinan. So even though I originally held that the land would be given to this person who said ahavasana, that it belongs to the father, that was the father's, right? That we uki ara becheskas avasa. But now that we have new testimony from the other person that it belonged to his father, so now we're going to take it out of this guy's hands, and we're not concerned of zlusa beidina. We're not concerned that people are going to look at Beis Din and they make a verdict, they reach a certain conclusion, and then all of a sudden we completely do a flip-flop that we change, and therefore because of that people are going to start thinking not to rely on Beis Din. We're not concerned about that, because after all, we have new testimony. And since new testimony came, so therefore that changes everything. So on this, we're going to ask a question. Meisiv Rava, V'itim Rav Zera, he asked the following question. Shnaim Omrim Meis, Shnaim Omrim Lo Mes. So you have two people that said a person died. What is this referring to? The Rashbam tells us. Isha Shalch Ba'al B'dinas Yom. So you have a woman whose husband goes across the country to another country. So we know that if we have testimony that her husband died, she's allowed to get remarried. But what happened over here? You actually have contradictory testimony. Two people said that he died, two said he didn't die. Inami, Shnaim Oimrim Nizgarsha B'chai Bala, two testify that she was divorced while he was still alive, and therefore because of that, if she did not have a child, normally there's a din yibum, but if she got divorced before he died, then she will not be zokuk. Two others said that she was not divorced. Inami, back in the Rashbam, the husband's alive, Harizu lo tinase the uki trail haditre v'isla becheskas iser eshasish kaima. So now let's go back in the Rash, in the Gemara. So the question is, what's the status of this woman? Is she allowed to get remarried when you have conflicting testimonies? Or shnaimam niskarsha, shnaimam lo niskarsha. Now the guy died. The question is, was she divorced before or afterwards, and therefore she's zokuk yavam? Harizu lo tinase. So we say we do not want her to get married. Because again, we have 2 against 2, and we look at her current status. What's her current status? She's married. So since her current status is married, so since we cancel those 2 testimonies out, we keep her at her original status, which is her being married, and therefore she should not get remarried based on this this contradiction. Now that's l'chatchila. However, the Gemara says, V'im nises lo teitzei. But if she did get married, b'diavad, we're not going to have her leave that second relationship. Why? Says the Rashbam, michti. Let's see. Train. You have 2, and he asked the question. If it's 2 against 2, how is it possible that a person is going to end up being married to her if it's a second guy in lo teitzei? In fact, the Gemara, also elsewhere, but the Rashbam points this out, is that this man is constantly ba'asham toli. Every time he's with this woman, this supposedly his new wife, maybe in fact she was not really divorced. Maybe her husband didn't really die. So how can we say lo teitzei? Right? So Mishani Omer Rav Sheshet that she actually married one of the witnesses that said that I know that your husband died. Right? So one of the men who said I know for sure your husband died is one who married her. So therefore he has no suffix, and therefore he's no asham toloi. Basu parchinan. We also ask another question. He gufa b'asham toli kaima. How about her? How does she know? Mishan b'omer's bari li shemes baili. If she says she's a bari, if she has a absolute, complete faith and trust that her husband died, then there's no longer a suffix. Okay, so that's the beginning of this piece. So it says, Vimni says lo teitzei. However, Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yosi, Amr teitzei. According to him, says no. If she got remarried, in this situation, she's not allowed to remain in this relationship in teitzei. So Amr Rabbi Menachem, Rabbi Yosi, Emosei ani Amr teitzei. When did I say that she has to leave the second relationship? Mizman shebo eidim ve'achach nises. It's when the witnesses that came and said, he is not dead. You're not divorced. You're not allowed to get remarried because your husband is not dead. And then she brazenly goes and gets married, even though you have witnesses that said that her husband's not dead. Then we say teitzei. However, if let's say she first got married because of the testimony of the witnesses that said that Mace, that he died. So she said, okay, my husband died, I'm going to marry someone else. And then afterwards, other witnesses come after she's already married and says that Lil Mace, so then we're not going to have her leave that marriage because she entered into that new marriage based on the information that everything was fine. So this is actually, believe it or not, a question. So let's look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says as follows. Aval im nises al pi ede misa, because she heard that her husband died, she tirua based in linase, the based in allowed her to get married, biachach bo edim shehu kayim, and then afterwards the witnesses, another group of witnesses says she's alive, lo teitze, we don't have her leave, and here's the key line, this is clear what I mean, teitze. So the Beis Din paskined that you are allowed to get married. So this is obviously the concern, that if all of a sudden we say teitze, so then people are going to be concerned as Lusa Beidina. So the only reason why we say that she could remain in this marriage is because we are concerned of Lusa Beidina. And this is therefore a kasha on the Shita Rab Nachman. Because Rab Nachman said that if the second guy came with testimony that he has Adam, that the land belonged to his father, like the first one, so then we will take the land out of the first person's hands, and we don't care about Zulus Beidina. What do you mean? Apparently we do. So the Gemara answers, I wanted to paskin in this manner. Hashdus vitan, since you asked this strong question, V'oisman Rav Hamnun Basurian else, he posed the point, we don't paskin like this. Says the Rashbam, I originally thought not to worry about Zulus de Medina, but now maybe I should. Nafak, so Rav Nachman went out, and he actually went and paskined like this. This is the Rashbam. Rav Nachman uvda v'lo yichash Zulus de Medina, as Rav Nachman before said, I'm not concerned. The Chazah savar tu'usihi biyadi. He saw and they thought it was a mistake. V'lohi el mishum detali ba'ashli Rabbi. The truth is that this discussion of whether we're chayash lus beidina and whether we go back and forth is something in which is a very a fundamental machlokas, which is like very thick, large ropes, which is analogous, says the Rashbam, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Gamliel, Kul Srilu, Doloi Chashil Zuz Beidina. So there are many people that are not chayash lus beidina. Some are, some aren't. So as we're going to see in tomorrow's daf, how we find that perhaps this is the gufa of a significant, serious machlokas, which is like Ashli Rav, whether or not we're chayash lus beidina. Okay, let's look at. We're going to stop there. Let's look at question 8. Shnaim armim mace. So 2 people said their husband died. Shnaim armim lo mes, and 2 said no. The nises, and she got married. Bari, which is like the Rashbam. She's confident. She's no need to bring an Asham Toloi. And also the man doesn't have to because he's one of the witnesses that said mace. The Be'eza Oifen. And what situational Kuliyama lo teitze ube'eza Oifen plukta? When does everyone say that she does not have to get remarried? So if nises v'achach bo edim lo teitze, everyone holds that if she got married based on the proper assumption that her husband died, and then only afterwards the witnesses came, then lo teitze. However, there's a machlokas is of ba edim achach nises. That is the machlokas. If she already had witnesses of lo mace, and then afterwards she went and nonetheless got married, that is where the machlokas is. And again, the question falls that why is it that everyone holds that nises rachach ba'edim, that harizul teitze must be because zulus beidina or chayish zulus beidina. But again, that's something which not everyone holds of. Okay, let's look at TA 15. Tayin mitchila shel voisai. Originally, a person says to my followers, Gav tayin shel vosecha v'kanisi oisa. And then afterwards, this goes back to where we started, Lamed Aleph and Aleph. So afterwards, originally he made the taina that the land is that the land was my father's. And then after he says, no, it was really your father, you got it from him. So so there's a whole machlokas over here, whether or not you can be toyin b'chayz v'toyin in this case. So on this question 15, when does everyone say you cannot be toyin b'chayz v'toyin? So there's actually two answers to this question. First of all, as we said, if let's say he goes, if he originally says it's my father's v'loi shel vosecha, and he says it's not your father's, then everyone's going to hold that you're eno toyin b'chayz v'toyin. So in that situation, for sure not. Furthermore, if let's say he was in Beis Din and he did not say anything, as the Gemara says, because as we said, he's going to obviously have learned the proper thing to say when he went outside. And then the question continues, when does everyone hold that you could be toyin b'chayz v'toyin? So he says like this: Im toyin shel avoisai shel lokhu mi'avosecha. If you said that it's my father's that bought it from your father, or you're outside of Beis Din and you said nothing, right? Behecha di ishtoi mili avroi v'loitoyin v'yosel beidin v'toyin dechayz v'toyin. In that situation, it's also not a problem. So those are that's one case, and also the Emerle shalavoi says shalachu me'avosecha dechayz v'toyin. So those are the times when a person can be toyin b'chayzer v'toyin. Okay. Continuing with TB 16. Shnayim omer mesh shnayim lomes. When he says slacher, this be'ez oif l'kol yamul oteitz be'ez oif and klukta, which is exactly the same question as question number 8. This is TB 16. So TB 16 is what I wrote. L'kol yamul oteitz im hi neseis techila kaidim la'edim shlomes. And I didn't write the witness that said lomes. V'yachad nises oz yesh machlokes im teitze o lo. Adka.